Hey guys, so yeah, at this point, when it comes to the anime reviews, you should just expect that they're pretty much going to happen in between my reviews of My Hero Academia and One Piece. But anyway, with that with that said, just jumping right into it, the episode pretty much starts off on a bang with Shiki, Rebecca, and Weiss raiding Sibir's hideout. And one thing I've really come to appreciate is how the anime is visualizing Shiki's ether gear and gravity powers. Because with the anime, it's shown in somewhat of more as a somewhat more intangible force of power, whereas the manga they kind of present it as more as something you could see, and I'm not necessarily see and feel and touch almost. And I'm not necessarily blaming the manga on that, because in that manga format, you do need to visually show what the power looks like. But because the anime isn't as restricted to that, I feel it taps much more into the overwhelming presence of gravity and how much of a pretty much intangible and sometimes invisible force it can be. Like, it's something you just can't see. It's there without comprehension, and I kind of love that for it. Of course, the episode wastes no time in showing Shiki having also landed. Of course, after a brief encounter, it also shows that Shiki basically lands himself in a dumping ground of old robots that were all used and abused by Sibir, showing that Pino wasn't necessarily the first one in order to suffer his his anger and his sadism and all that. And for as intense as the imagery was when I first read this in the for as intense as the imagery is and was, I didn't really think about it all that much when I first read the manga. But nowadays, this very simple moment between Shiki and Johnny takes on a whole new freaking meaning for me, and even more so, and a lot more, and in a much more contextual way too, because in the same way that it shows an interesting parallel in the sense where in the same way that from Shiki had spent his whole life caring for machines and treating them as equals, Sabir has treated them as disposable toys and nothing to and just nothing in which in order to think about at the time. They're just machines, that's all. And let's just say going forward, you're going to see a lot more scenes and moments like this that illustrate this very emotionally blurred line between man and machine. One on one side, where on one side you have a human who machine who is can be equally as capable of human understanding and kindness as humans themselves. But on the other end of the spectrum, you'll basically have a human who is capable of calculated indifference and cruelty on the same level that an emotionless machine would be. And the dynamics of both are constantly shifting and changing throughout the story. Like the whole premise of what exactly makes a man, what is it that makes a human, what is it that makes a machine. These are the kind of themes going forward that you're going to find more and more as the series goes forward. And this is kind of the stepping stone to that, more or less. Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about art and animation, because the art and animation this week was actually kind of amazing in this episode, like specifically, especially in the climax. Like the climax, like the art and animation was good overall in this episode, but the climax is where it really felt like it just kind of where everything just popped. And I mean, there is one thing we need to talk about, but yeah, this is probably the episode with the most visual spectacle I've seen so far. And in a lot of ways, JC Staff I think even elevated the climax compared to the manga, honestly. And and overall, just watching this episode, I think kind of gave me a bit of an understanding of JC Staff's approach to the series and just structure of future episodes and seasons and whatnot, which is I think for the most part. Now, again, greatly this kind of depends on what kind of budget they're working with at the time, but I think with Eden Zero, JC Staff's approach right now is to do as much as possible with pretty much the pretty much most minimal approach when it comes to the initial setup and premise of an arc. Like with those initial like episodes of us getting to know the world and whatnot, it's probably not gonna. It's still gonna be visually pleasing on an art perspective, but as animation, it's probably for as far as animation goes, it's probably gonna be very minimal in certain respects. But once the arc reaches that climax, I think that's where we can expect JC Staff to just go all out with the animation. Like that's at least within this first season, that's kind of how I can see them approaching it. Now, with that said, we do need to address the CGI mech suit, which, yeah, I'll be honest, kind of fits in the category of slightly awkward, but overall, it is one of the better uses I've seen in anime. Like, it feels like when it comes to CGI in anime, frankly, I'm always a little bit hit and miss. But lately, I have found that CGI technology is getting better in how it's used in anime, and this is one of those times where it does feel like a bit of an improvement, to say something like, again, Berserk 2016 or something like that. Like, the technology, people like studios, I think, are getting better at using this technology than they were in the past. And yeah, with that said, let's talk about the fight with Shiki versus Sibir, because it's well documented on my channel that when I read this fight in the manga, I hated it. Like, I did a whole rant on it. And looking back, it's not as bad as I thought I had initially like perceived it as, but also mainly because the anime pretty much makes it a lot more clearer, honestly, that during this entire fight, that Shiki had basically doped himself up on his own power, and combined with his rage for Sibir, it does make it overall, the fight itself, like, it pretty much flows better overall, and does make a lot more logistical sense. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, this fight also made it more visually clear of a certain concept of gravity ether that pretty much Shiki had just tapped into in order to that Shiki had tapped into in this arc, that is going to be touched upon later. But it's like you pretty much all saw that pretty much purple ether he had tapped into. Well, that in itself is, if I understand what that is correctly, it's actually a concept of gravity ether that is going to be explored later on. And I think this is our first look at it is what Shiki used to defeat Sibir. Also, I definitely appreciate a lot more of Pino's role in the fight, and how she was the one who ultimately had disabled Sibir's robot, like making it so like it would be easier for pretty much Shiki to in order to defeat Sibir. Like this fight made me realize that without the robot, like, Sibir himself isn't exactly that much of a fighter. So yeah. Even more than that, though, if you'll remember what I said last week about Mashima's writing methods with Eden Zero, Sibir himself might have been, even if you like the fight, I think we can more or less agree that Sibir himself was somewhat undercooked as a villain. But the thing is, this whole adventure on Norma and Sibir himself is really just a stepping stone to a much greater threat. Like, a much greater threat down the line. Granted, it is a much greater threat and a much greater, like, antagonist that our heroes are going to face down the line. Now, granted, the antagonist in question, we're going to get introduced to the antagonist in this season, but as far as involvement with our heroes, that won't happen until season 2. But from here on, one thing to kind of take notice of is going to be this kind of interconnecting thread of adventures on these planets that have been kind of ravaged by criminal activity, with a single person responsible for all of that. Again, it's and that person is the main villain that's basically good, that we're building to. Again, the conflict with him itself probably won't happen until season 2, but yeah, you are gonna get introduced to him in this season, I think. Obviously, one of the more lighthearted things to talk about, though, is the battle of Rebecca versus the Foot Brothers, which I never read the official translated translation for the manga, so I don't know how accurate this is to that. But the episode apparently gave the Foot Brothers this cartoonishly stereotypical, like, I don't know, German Russian kind of dialogue, which took me off guard a bit from how I'd imagine their dialogue would play out in the anime. But yeah, it was a little weird, but I'm like, hey, okay, if you're gonna make this, fight worth anything worth watching, I guess make it a little more comically entertaining, I guess. And yeah, as far as the fight itself, like honestly, it's fine. If I'm being honest, the Foot Brothers fight, look, is kind of the one fight looking back where my opinion hasn't really changed all that much, frankly. Like the only real purpose I think that the fight with the Foot Brothers really shows is it does serve to still establish the fighting dynamics. But aside from that, it is just one of the weaker fights overall. And yeah, for a group that's supposed for a set of brothers who are supposed to be as notorious as they are, the Foot Brothers didn't really prove to be much, frankly. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. Enjoy the video, like, comment, subscribe. I'm on Twitter, Analyst, Crunchyroll. Be sure to hit the bell, comment, subscribe, and follow me and share. But yeah, guys, Death Not Doing Me. Signing off. Later, guys.